Okay, welcome. We're going to get started. Welcome to your first Rails pull request. Other working titles for this talk have been how to submit a pull request to Rails without everyone laughing at you, and how to submit a pull request to Rails without being a complete jerk. The second one is actually a lot harder than the first one. I am Mark McSpadden. You can find me on the GitHubs, on the Twitters, just about any place I try to grab the Mark McSpadden name. I work at Sabre. Who has heard of Sabre? Like 8 people. So we serve backends of travel systems, airline reservations, hotel reservations. We own this company called Travelocity you might be familiar with. We do about 1 billion API calls a day. None of it in Ruby, and they don't let me touch any of it. I run the tech side of Sabre Labs, the group of volatiles that fights with the stables, if you were here for that talk. We're based in Dallas. I help organize the Dallas Ruby Brigade. And this year we were at our first conference called Big Ruby. Who's heard of Big Ruby? Like another 5 people. Conference in Dallas. We're going to do it again next year. It's about people doing big things with Ruby. Really good feedback from the content. In fact, you're in here, which means you're not next door at Brian's talk. Brian gave a talk on services and Rails and the stuff they don't tell you. At our conference, it's up on Confreaks, so you get a 2-for-1 by being here today. Kind of cool. All the videos are up on Confreaks. I really encourage you to check it out. So are you impressed yet? Have I established my authority as a speaker that should be up here? Please do not be impressed. I feel like I belong out there. Someone else should be up here. This is my GitHub open source graph. Who has a graph that looks better than that in here? Yeah, it's lots of people. Good job. Way to go. So how did I end up here? So to ask that, we'll go way back to 2012, beginning of the year. I've been doing Rails for 6, almost 7 years at the time, and I'm like, you know what? It is time for me to start giving back. You know, you just have that inside of you. You feel like, okay, it's about time. And so because at the beginning of the year, it's the time of year where we make bold proclamations. So I said, I'm going to submit a pull request to Rails every month for the whole year. Now, a couple of things about bold proclamations. Number one, I don't make them in public anymore. So I just told myself this. Also, I didn't set the bar really high. Notice I said submit a pull request. I don't even care if it gets accepted at this point. Just hitting the submit button is a big deal. I'm sure you guys can all see where this is going. Obviously, I failed. But I did end up with some pull requests. So 10 total pull requests to Rails. 9 of them were accepted. And this talk is a little bit about what I learned along the way. But big red disclaimer is that I'm not on the Rails core team. I'm not on the Rails issues team. I'm not on any other secret Rails team that I don't even know exists. And I do not speak for them. But I feel like I'm a lot like you, and that means I feel like I can help you with your first Rails pull request. And speaking of you, how many of you have attempted to submit a pull request to Rails? Wow, there are like 7 hands, 8 hands. Okay, how many of you got accepted? Oh, good rate. Okay. Okay, how many of you have submitted a pull request to anything on GitHub? Oh, okay. That's a lot of hands. Okay. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we contribute to Rails. Hopefully you can get inspired that this is something that you can actually do. I believe that you can do this. If I can do it, you can do it, trust me. So why would you contribute to Rails? One is to make the world a better place. Oh, that's great. Actually, I joke about this, but it's kind of where I was last year. If you were who was at Ernie's talk yesterday? A lot of people. So that talk kind of ramps up at the end, like make active record better. And you kind of come away and you're like, I'm going to do that. I mean, I didn't do that. I had to work on these slides. But hopefully you went away and you were like, I'm going to work on active record, which is a great motivation to make the world a better place. Another motivation is to make your life easier. Maybe you think that by changing the way that Rails works, your job will be easier. I have to tell you, this is a really long play if this is your motivation. This is a very scientific graph of your quality of life over time. You see the point at which you say, I know, I'll submit a pull request. Your quality of life goes significantly down for a while. And it does come back up after the pull request process is complete, and then you do have a better life, but that can take, it's a variable time. It's kind of crazy. So the third reason, which I think is actually the most important reason to submit a pull request to Rails, is to better understand Rails. This is the gold star, double unicorn, rainbow reason. I've learned so much about not only the ecosystem, the tools around Rails, its internals, just by being willing to spend a few hours on a given day digging into an issue or trying to make something that I thought was important come to life. I think this is the reason you should be trying to contribute to Rails. And it works out pretty well because it's self-serving. So, also, fourth reason is to get famous. That's why you should contribute to Rails. I'm kind of serious. Who's seen this site? This site is awesome. You learn about it when you get your first pull request submitted because you are on the leaderboard of contributors to Rails. Contributors.rubyonrails.org. You can see here I'm number 336. I'm also the 6th mark on the list. I was like 4th, and then some other marks got ambitious. This becomes a game in and of itself, which I think is a really interesting element. I think it's a really fun thing to do. There's also filters on it where you can sort by month. Or like one month I was really active, and I was like, I'm the 3rd best this month. This can be a motivator for you. So hopefully one of those things kind of fits where you're at. You want to make Rails better, you want to make your life better, you want to better understand Rails, or you want to be famous. And so I want to give you a quick overview of what I'll call the ecosystem around pull requests. We don't talk about this much, but it's really kind of hard to grasp unless you're in there, and I want to set your expectations for what you can expect in that ecosystem. I mentioned earlier I work at a really big company. We have a joke that no slide deck is complete without an org chart. So I went to look for a Rails org chart, and there's not one. So I think I present to you the first ever Rails org chart, which I don't think is all that great. But some things I want to point out. There is a core team. You guys familiar with them? They make decisions about where Rails is going. They commit a lot of code. They have commit bits. There's also an issues team. How many of you are familiar with the issues team? A few of you. Okay. So the issues team's been around for only about a year, and their main job is to triage issues as they come in. At Rails Conf last year, we had a ton of issues in Rails. They have been amazing in taking that list, asking for more feedback, closing issues that aren't relevant. This group is probably the one you're going to interface with most if you're having conversations about your pull requests. And then over here on the far left, there are more than just Rails in the Rails organization on GitHub. And so there are people that maintain these gems like TurboLinks and JBuilder and remember Axe's List, like that's a different repo now, and they all have maintainers. And then there's us, and the reason that I think big organizations have problems with open source sometimes is they don't get this org structure that like everybody talks to everybody. But it's a really, really unique ecosystem that we have that at any point we can be talking to any one of these people. And I just thought it was cool to call it out. How is that still in there? That's actually my draft of the org chart. So what you should know about the ecosystem is how to communicate. So there are a couple of ways people that contribute to Rails communicate. The first one is through the Rails core mailing list. Who has subscribed to this list? Okay, this is like the first actionable thing you can do is subscribe to the Rails core mailing list. It's a Google group. The volume is super low. 5 emails a week sometimes up to 10. Go ahead and subscribe to get every email. This is where discussions happen about what goes into Rails. Now, not every discussion of everything that goes into Rails happens on this mailing list. But you can subscribe. You can listen to the conversations. This group's open. You can post questions. You can ask questions like, hey, I have this pull request. It's been out for a really long time. Can somebody please look at it? Great, great resource. Secondly, communication happens within GitHub itself. So there are two main ways. Oh, that's hard to see. At the very top of when you're in the Rails repo, there's a watch button. That is like the fire hose of Rails. If you do that, that is awesome. I can't handle that. Also, what's interesting is on the bottom of each issue, there's a watch button for that issue where you get updates, you'll get emails whenever a new comment is added or something changes on that issue. I think that's a really cool feature if you're interested in something that's going on, or maybe you have a bug that someone's already reported. Watch that issue, see what's going on with it. It's a good way. Also, face-to-face communication, conferences, meetups. This is the help desk from yesterday. These conferences are a great opportunity to sit down and talk with people that are actually putting things into Rails, asking them questions, sharing your ideas, sharing your thoughts, sharing your pain with them. Take advantage of these opportunities. And more than likely, if you go to some kind of meetup, there is somebody that is either on the core team or issues team, or they know somebody that is. It's a very, there's a lot of us here. It's a very small world. So some quick stats on pull requests, and these are going to be since the end of Rails Conf last year, is that there were 2,912 pull requests opened over the course of the year, about 8 a day. Of those, 1,916 were actually merged in. So we've got about 3,000, almost 2,000 merged in. Your chances of being merged into Rails are really good if you submit a pull request. Think like the guy in the prize session said yesterday, that's like over half. Now, of course, there were some that are rejected, and rejected isn't really a status. What happens is your pull request gets closed, and it's not merged in. It's kind of that it's not you, it's me thing. They don't say like rejected. They just close it and don't merge it. About 27% of the pull requests were rejected last year. And 200 pull requests over the course of the year are still open. These are like zombie pull requests. I don't know if these ever get solved. So let's talk a little bit about the merged pull requests. So the average time for one of the merged pull requests to go from being open to being accepted in the Rails, 5.5 days. You should all be like, averages lie. 74% of them, less than 24 hours. That's amazing for an open source project. The people that work on this deserve a whole lot of credit. And if you want to go out to the 90th percentile, we're talking 9 days. 90% of the merged pull requests were merged in within 9 days. Let's flip over and talk about the ones that were rejected. The average time to rejection is 18 days. Averages still lie. About half are closed and not merged within 24 hours. And then within a week, we're talking 73% of them. So what I want you to take away from this is that the pull request process seems like it takes a long time sometimes, and especially when you're in it, it feels that way. But really, within the first day, you're going to know a lot about your pull requests, and within the first week, you're going to know even more. So I want this to be a piece of encouragement that this is not a lifelong commitment. When you sign up to say, I want to do a pull request, this is something you can do in a week or even a weekend. And then one more little semantic thing, classification of a pull request and an issue. A pull request is an issue is not a pull request. You hit the issues page, you'll see the issues that have pull request code with them and those that don't. See, they got little logos. If you hit the pull request tab, you see just the pull requests. If you want to see just the issues with no pull requests in them, you have to use your eyeballs. There's no button for it that I've found. Surely in a room this size, there's at least 50 people that work for GitHub. Maybe we should talk about this. Okay, so we spent some time. We've run through being inspired. Why do you want to contribute to Rails? We've talked a little bit about the ecosystem so that you know what you're getting yourself into, hopefully. So now, how do we actually go about submitting a pull request? So first, you have to pick a thing to work on. This is actually kind of hard. And there's lots of places that you can find this thing. You can find this thing from your personal experience. It can be your own vision for a feature. It can be from pain and anger. One thing I will mention is that anger leads to hate and hate leads to suffering. So that's what Yoda said. So be careful about spending too much time here, but this is a good springboard. And another thing, especially about these types of pull requests, I recommend to build first and discuss later. There's a lot of messages on the core mailing list that go something to the effect of this. Hey, I think it'd be great if this thing was able to do this thing like this. If anyone is interested, I'll work up a pull request. Okay. I get we don't want to waste our time, but part of doing a pull request is understanding Rails better. So I always think it's better, do the pull request, learn as much as you can about Rails, and then let's talk about whether it's worth it or not later. Okay, so we talked about personal experience. You can also go pull things off the Rails issues list. There are a lot of Rails issues. This was last night, yesterday. Ernie pointed out yesterday, a lot of them are in active record. But there are a lot of myths about issues that I kind of wanted to talk about. The first myth is that there are a lot of these little issues that are just waiting for me to like swoop in on like a 15-minute break and like solve real quick. That's not true. I think Steve Klobnik tweeted a couple of weeks ago that if there were any issues like that, he would have solved them because I think he knows where he is on the contributor board and where he wants to be as well. So this, if you're going to pull something off the issues list, it's a multi-hour thing. Like it really is. I don't do that to scare you. I do that to tell you take the time to do it. Like block off a Saturday morning. Block off one of your hack nights. Like you can do this. Just don't be surprised that it takes an hour to get into the problem. Myth number 2 is that if I comment on an issue, people will mistake me for someone that's really important, like a core member or something like that. I had this fear like when I was, so if I go through the issues list, I might say, can you tell me more about the problem? Can you clarify what version of Rails you're using, what version of Ruby? And I was scared that they were going to think that I was somebody like important. But then I realized that both my picture and my name are a link to my GitHub page, and they find out really quick that I'm not that important. So this should not be a reason for you not to ask questions on somebody's issues. Feel free to ask the questions of, are you still having this problem? What version of Rails are you using? What version of Ruby are you using? Can you create a gist for this? Like all kinds of just clarifications. If you're really going to dig in on an issue, you want to know as much as possible about it. And myth number 3 is that people that comment on issues are jerks, and they'll get pulled into these big things that end up on Hacker News. The comment threads are really pretty boring. You can't find a lot of, yeah, every once in a while one of them blows up, and we all know what happens there. But for the most part, these things are boring. You can be nice and do this. So the other spot we can pick up things is the supporting gems. How many of you know how many gems or repos are actually in the Rails org? A few, right? There's a few repos under the Rails org. There's 66 repos under the Rails org right now. That's a lot of code that's more than just Rails/Rails. Of those, 20 of them have been updated within the last month. I'd call those fairly active projects. And of those 20, 14 of them have open issues today. Now, the great part about using one of these support gems is that usually the code bases are smaller. Usually the politics are smaller and the opinions are smaller. And the people that commit to these really, really want your help. That's some of the feedback I got when I sent some surveys out. So really view these as an opportunity to contribute to Rails. Now, if your inspiration was to get famous, I have to tell you, you don't end up on the contributors.rubyonrails.org list if you commit to one of these other gems. So if that's your motivation, this might not be the one for you. But if you want to make the world a better place, totally the place to start. And then there are security pull requests. Who is in the security is hard talk. Okay, a couple of people. Do not submit security issues via pull requests. Everybody got that? If you found a security issue, do not submit it via a pull request. There is a whole page about what to do with it, rubyonrails.org/security. This outlines the process for submitting those. So do not submit a pull request for that. Good. Okay. So we picked a thing. The next piece, which I think gets skipped a lot, is to research the thing. And this is really just searching. Search GitHub issues, search the mailing list, search Stack Overflow. Get really familiar with the thing that you're working on. My first pull request into Rails was an inflection bug. Now, if you do a single search on inflection and Rails core, you'll find out really quickly that the core does not accept patches on inflection anymore. It's frozen, It's too fragile. It breaks too many things when we change it. Okay, that's the stance. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyways. But part of knowing that, I was really careful. I knew the domain, and during my pull requests, I can talk about how I presented an argument of why I thought it should change, and it did change. So being knowledgeable about what you're working on, very, very important. So we are 20 minutes into a talk, and now we're going to talk about computers, which is great. So setting up your environment to contribute to Rails. There is a site on the guides for contributing to Ruby on Rails. I want to point something out really important. You want to use the Edge guide on this topic. You get to the Edge guide two ways. One way is if you are on the README of Rails, the link to contributing to Rails goes to the Edge guide. Otherwise, go to guides.rubyonrails.org and then put the word Edge on the front half of the subdomain. The reason that you want the Edge guide is because it has this section, setting up a development environment, and it has this subsection, which is the easy way and the hard way. If you use the regular guide, there is no easy way. There's only the hard way, and you don't want to do that because I did it, and I like the easy way. So what is the easy way? The easy way is a project. Oh, look, it's a project under Rails again. It's called Rails DevBox. Anybody used Rails DevBox? One person, two people. We can change that by the end of the day, I'm sure. Creates a virtual machine for you to do core development. And what that means is that there are a lot of dependencies that Rails needs to run all its tests. Like you need MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, all configured in a certain way. You need lots of packages, lots of different things. Stuff that you don't have to worry about when you're developing on Rails, but when you're testing Rails, you have to worry about. This virtual machine comes with those all pre-baked. It has a couple requirements. VirtualBox, that's free. Vagrant, that's free. And so what do? First, you open your purple terminal. The purple is important. We'll get back to it. You clone the project, you cd in the directory, and you say vagrant up. And this is actually going to take a while because the virtual machine doesn't actually come with the project. There's a link to the virtual machine. So it has to download it and then do a bunch of stuff. But while you're waiting on it, we can do other things like fork Rails. People fork GitHub repos before. Some forking, some not. Okay, we'll go through it really quickly. There's a fork button on Rails. It brings up your profile. If you have multiple organizations, ask you where you want it. That's Travel Chewy. He's our mascot. Then you get this that used to say hardcore forking action but doesn't anymore. And then you end up on your fork of the project. Okay? So then we drop into a blue terminal, different than the purple terminal. Different. But we're going to go to the same place. And location here matters a little bit. I know that when I'm running through like tutorials and it's like, and go to this directory and then clone this project, you're like, I'll clone it where I want to. Thank you very much. Trust me just a little bit on this one. Is that you want to go to the same spot where you pulled out the dev box. Clone from Rails. There are two different workflows, like starting with cloning from Rails or starting to clone from your fork of it. I find the Rails flow just a little bit easier when it goes to pulling down stuff, updating your copy, and I think it's a little bit better. You can do it the other way if you prefer. So you'll clone Rails, and then you'll have a Rails directory. You're going to cd into it, and then you're going to create a branch for whatever you're doing. Naming here is kind of arbitrary. I stick with like a feature underscore if I'm adding something, a fix underscore issue number if I'm trying to fix something. And then you open up your text editor. See, I told you not to be impressed. I don't even use one of those elite editor things. But so we've done that. Now we can go back over to our purple terminal. And up here we can see that Vagrant has spun up. And what we're going to do is we're going to SSH into the virtual machine. Kind of cool. We don't even have to know credentials or anything. Just do Vagrant SSH into this virtual machine. And then if you list /Vagrant directory, this is why it matters where you put Rails. This Rails is the mirror of the Rails you cloned in the blue terminal. So we're gonna have a workflow here that's pretty cool. So we do a bundle install on here, and then we run rake. And look, you can run the Rails tests. That is a big achievement. don't ever run all the Rails tests. I was really surprised when I read this in the contributing guide. They're like, yeah, we have CI, and it takes the CI like 16 minutes. It will take, I've been trying to run them off and on like while I've been here, and I just haven't got through the whole test suite in a single sitting anytime. So the recommendation is to definitely add your tests, test what's around it, and test the main gem around it. So if you're doing something on active support, run all the tests for active support. If you're doing something on active record, do that. The only caveat is if you're doing something in rail ties, they ask you to test the whole suite. But for the most part, you shouldn't have to run the whole thing ever. That's really scary because I've had the CI go red on something I did before, and that makes you feel really bad. But that's what they tell us to do. So let's just do it. And here we go. This is running. If you CD into one of the gems, active support, and run rake, it'll only run the test for that gem. Also, this one's a little harder to read, but you can just run a single test file, or you can run a single test file and a single test within it. This is one of the things that I feel like is really important about contributing back to Rails, is you get better at some of this stuff that you may not do in your test suite all the time. Like you may just run rake every time, or rake test, or rake spec, or whatever. This exposes you to different ways of having to work around those issues. Whew, 25 minutes, and now we can code our thing. All right. Okay, and so we've got a workflow here. We're going to code on our physical machine, and we're going to test on the virtual machine. Okay? Code on the physical machine, test on the virtual machine. And this is where you go code spelunking. Some pieces of Rails are really easy to get in and out of. Like, they make a lot of sense. Some of them aren't. There's a big push for needing help on active record, and it's a really gnarly code base. There are a lot of fixtures. If you ever want to feel better about the choices you've made in your test suite, go look at active record, and you will feel instantly better about your code base. But we can't just ignore it. It's not going away. I think it's important to lean into. And so this is where you have to figure out how to best contribute to Rails. So you coded. Good job. Wow, that was quick. So now it's time to review and reflect a little bit. So ask yourself a few questions. Does this match the style of the code around it? I think this is really important. There are style guides on indentation and using and instead of the word and that the style guides are in the contributing website. But really, look at everything around it. Does your code fit? Could this hurt performance? And have I benchmarked it? One of the pull requests I did, which I'm super excited about Rails 4 because most of what I've done isn't coming out until Rails 4. A core extension and active support to hash, which is transform keys. We used to get in a discussion about once a month about what's the best way to transform a key on a hash, to use inject, to use each with object. So what I did is I refactored stringify and symbolize keys to be transform keys. And everyone was like, that's great. We use those all the time in Rails. How does this affect performance? And I was like, I don't know. So lots of benchmarking. I learned a lot about benchmarking and how the Rails team expects benchmarks to be done. I was using really big hashes to benchmark against. They were like, no, we use a lot of small hashes a lot of times. So some really interesting just learnings, which is, I think, still the best reason to do this. What are the future maintenance implications of my change? This is really interesting to the core team because they have to maintain it, and you may just come and throw it over the wall and leave. So make sure you've considered this. And then, of course, does this make Rails a better place? You hear a lot about the code test. Does the code I write because of this improve because of the addition you've made to Rails? Obviously, if it's a bug fix, that answer is yes. If it's a feature, then there's a lot more debate about it. And then find a friend. Have someone look over this with you. These are my girls. Find someone that can look at the code with you, talk about it with them, because you're going to want a friend before you go in and submit your pull request. Okay? So find a friend. Then, one more time, run the tests, just the ones you need. Update the changelog. So if you are adding a feature or fixing a bug, they ask you to update the changelog with that. If you are just doing a refactoring, they ask you not to update the changelog, just to be aware of that. And then squash your commits. Usually this isn't a big deal the first time. You try to get everything in like one commit, but kind of the rule is they want one commit per pull request. Squashing commits is a little bit outside of what we'll do here, but there's lots of guides online with it. It's really scary the first time you do it, and then the second time it's really kind of, oh, okay. And this happens more if you go back and forth and need to make changes on the code that you've submitted during your pull request. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so we'll talk about submitting a pull request. Okay, so here we go. We're going to commit. Remember, we're working on our branch. And then we wouldn't have to do so much stuff, except for Rails is an ever-changing code base. So what we have to do is before we submit, before we push our branch to our forked repo, what we're going to do is we're going to rebase from Rails. Because there was a lot of stuff going on in Rails since the time you checked it out, so we want to make sure we have all those changes, make sure we didn't break anything. So the way to do that is here, we check out master, you do a git pull rebase, and this is where I said it matters that you clone from Rails instead of your Rails. We're going to check out our branch and then rebase it to master. Then we're going to git remote add. You only have to do this the first time. We're going to add a remote called mine, which points to, hey, your Rails. And then you're going to push your branch up there. Okay, and that's all you have to do on your machine. That's it. Then you go, so you're not done. Then you go to GitHub, and you go to your Rails up here, and you say, okay, I want to submit a pull request. So now you're in pull request mode, okay? And you can totally hit that button and nothing bad will happen. So if you just want to like go home today and like hit the pull request button, like do that. Just to see what this looks like on your machine. You're going to pick the branch that you just pushed up. You can say, oh yeah, I totally want to pull request from this branch to Rails master. This is where you're going to write a summary. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the other tabs are commits. There should be one of these. And then the file changes, like this is the diff of what you did, which is really cool to look at your diff. So summary, explain yourself, show how smart you are, show how much research you've done on the topic, link to any performance benchmarks or any other issues. And then I think this is some secret sauce, CC people. So the issues team does a really good job of trying to kind of spread the pull requests out where they think they belong. One of the things I like to do, especially if I've had a pull request that's sitting stagnant for a couple of days, is do a git blame around the code that you just changed. See who's been working on it. CC that person. They'll get an email if you say @person. They'll get an email. It helps move things along. So use Git to your advantage here. And then you submit the pull request. And then you wait. And I'm telling you, walk away from your computer. Like, walk away. I trust GitHub a lot. I don't know if they can handle the amount of refreshing that will happen if you just stay at your computer. And then someone will comment on it or say something or merge it, and then you respond and you go back and forth. And then, oh my goodness, you go there one day and look, it says merged. This is so cool. Like, I can't even describe to you the feeling that this is. Like, think about solving that really, really hard problem with code. Like, this is better than that because someone else validated it. And then sometimes it doesn't work out so well. So they close the issue, and then you get this. But you still learned a whole lot. I can't stress this enough. You are a better Rails developer because you went through this process. Wrap up real quickly. I think you should be inspired to contribute to Rails. I think there's lots of reasons why it's good. We have a great ecosystem for accepting pull requests and having you be able to contribute. I sent a note out to the people on the Rails, the members listed on the GitHub org, and I just asked them a few questions when I knew I was going to give this talk. I said, so what are the biggest mistakes you see people make? They said no tests and no docs. Tests and docs. It's pretty simple. Let's do this. Then I asked them, so what's your favorite pull request of all the ones you've seen? And most of the responses I got back were, well, my favorite one is my first one. So your favorite pull request is waiting for you. Go make it happen. Thanks.